Casual dinner you'd prefer?
I would have thought you'd start with polygraphs.
I wanted to try masala. Contains a healthy...
I know they're not.
Otherwise.
You and Freddie sitting across from me.
Oh, I have paid the bill and tipped like a gangster.
Oh, come on.
Yes, it's cold. Okay, good to see you.
Pills are becoming a problem as well.
You'd be surprised.
It was all fine till little Eddie Snowden decided.
Optimistic.
Did you get help from oversight?
It rolled out a rash. Guess you shouldn't have emailed those pictures.
That is unique. Kathryn, Freddie.
It's common knowledge.
Well, that's for him.
And half your life's in the black.
You are so...
Did your father?
Groundbreaking shit.
Steven Soderbergh shoots a marriage falling apart like it's a heist. That's the genius move at the heart of Black Bag, his 2025 spy thriller that treats domestic espionage with the same clinical precision he brought to casino robberies and pandemic outbreaks. Cate Blanchett plays an intelligence officer investigating her own husband, Michael Fassbender, for treason, and Soderbergh films their unraveling relationship like he's documenting a surgical procedure. Cold, methodical, devastating. Released on March 14, 2025 by Focus Features, Black Bag arrived with modest expectations and delivered exactly what Soderbergh fans crave: economical storytelling, visual intelligence, and performances stripped of vanity. The film clocks in at a lean 93 minutes, no fat, no filler, just pure narrative efficiency. It's the kind of thriller that trusts you to keep up, refusing to hold your hand through exposition dumps or spell out emotional beats. You either lock in or you miss it. But here's the brutal irony. Despite critical praise and a stacked cast, Black Bag flopped hard at the box office. With a production budget hovering around 50-60 million, the film limped to just 43.4 million worldwide to 1.5 million domestically. Focus Features had to be sweating those numbers. Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender, two of the most respected actors working today, couldn't pull in audiences during a crowded spring 2025 release window. The theatrical landscape just didn't have room for a quiet, intelligent spy drama when blockbusters were eating up screens. Yet, quality doesn't always correlate with commercial success. Black Bag represents Soderbergh operating at full capacity. Writing under his usual pseudonym, Mary Ann Bernard, he edited this one, shooting as Peter Andrews, his cinematography alias, and collaborating with screenwriter David Coep to craft something genuinely adult. This is a film for people who miss when thrillers assume their audience had functioning brains. The premise sounds straightforward enough. Kathryn St. Jean, a British intelligence officer, receives evidence suggesting her husband George Woodhouse, also in the spy game, might be selling state secrets. She is ordered to investigate him without his knowledge. What follows isn't a bombastic action spectacle with car chases and shootouts. Instead, Soderbergh delivers something far more excruciating. Watching two people who genuinely love each other weaponize intimacy, every conversation becoming a minefield of half-truths and strategic revelations. Nico Soderbergh's been circling the spy genre for years without fully committing. The Informant toyed with espionage through dark comedy. Contagion treated a virus outbreak like intelligence work. Side Effects merged psychological thriller elements with paranoia. But Black Bag represents his first pure dive into the world of handlers, assets, double agents, and operational security. And he brings his entire aesthetic toolkit: handheld cameras that feel documentary, real, natural lighting that refuses to glamorize, and editing rhythms that prioritize information flow over emotional manipulation. The screenplay comes from David Coep, a writer whose career spans the blockbuster spectrum: Jurassic Park, Mission, Impossible, Spider-Man, but who's also penned quieter, nastier work like Premium Rush and Ghost Town. Coep understands structure. He knows how to plant information early and detonate it later. Paired with Soderbergh's visual minimalism, the result feels like John le Carré filtered through the aesthetic of the limey, emotionally raw espionage where the real danger isn't guns but knowledge. Filming took place across London and Switzerland with production centered at Pinewood Studios. Soderbergh shot on location in Zurich, capturing the neutral zone atmosphere of European intelligence operations where everyone's watching. Everyone, and trust is currency more valuable than money. The locations aren't exotic postcards, they are functional spaces that reinforce the film's central theme. Espionage is work, tedious, meticulous, soul crushing work that bleeds into every aspect of your life until you can't separate performance from reality. Nee David Holmes composed the score, continuing his long-time collaboration with Soderbergh that stretches back to the Ocean's trilogy. Holmes doesn't overplay his hand here. The music pulses underneath scenes, creating unease without announcing itself. It's the sonic equivalent of Soderbergh's visual approach. Present but not showy, functional but not forgettable. Philip Messina handled production design, bringing the same attention to detail he's demonstrated across multiple Soderbergh projects. The interiors in Black Bag feel lived in, but carefully curated. These are spaces occupied by people who understand that objects carry information. A misplaced book could signal a dead drop. An unlocked drawer might be a test. Every element of the environment exists in service of operational security. And Messina makes you feel that constant, low-grade paranoia embedded in the architecture itself. Yeah, the cast Soderbergh assembled represents a masterclass in intelligent casting. Cate Blanchett brings her signature intensity but dials down the theatricality. Kathryn isn't a movie spy doing cool poses. She's a professional drowning in personal crisis. Michael Fassbender matches her restraint, playing George as someone who might be guilty or might be the most convincing innocent man alive. The ambiguity lives in Fassbender's eyes, in the pauses before he answers questions, in the way he touches his wife like he's already losing her. Supporting them, Pierce Brosnan, deliciously cast against his Bond legacy as Arthur Stieglitz, an intelligence mandarin whose loyalties remain deliberately murky. Reggie John Page appears as Cole, James Stokes, bringing commanding presence to a role that requires projecting authority without explanation. Marissa Abela, Tom Burke, and Naomi Harris round out the ensemble, each occupying specific functions in the intelligence apparatus that orbits around Kathryn's investigation. What's fascinating about this cast is how Soderbergh strips them of star power. Nobody gets hero moments. Nobody delivers stirring speeches. They're all cogs in a bureaucratic machine that values deniability over valor. Brosnan, who spent years embodying 007's suave confidence, here plays exhaustion and compromise. It's brilliant countercasting that forces you to reconsider what spy work actually entails versus what Hollywood has sold us for decades. The R rating gives Soderbergh room to operate honestly, not because Black Bag is particularly violent or sexual. It's not, but because adult relationships require adult language and moral complexity that PG-13 ratings sanitize. Characters swear when stressed. Intimacy carries consequences. Violence, when it appears, isn't choreographed ballet. It's ugly and final. Soderbergh shot Black Bag with his typical efficiency, moving fast and keeping the crew lean. He's talked extensively over his career about hating bloated productions, and this film exemplifies his stripped-down approach. Shooting as his own cinematographer means fewer people between intention and execution. Editing under a pseudonym means he controls the final assembly. This level of authorial control results in films that feel coherent, singular, completely unified in vision. The theatrical release strategy proved problematic. Opening March 14, 2025 in the United States, Black Bag faced competition from holdover blockbusters and incoming franchise entries. Focus Features positioned it as counter-programming, the smart choice for adults tired of CGI spectacle. But that audience increasingly waits for streaming. The demographics most likely to appreciate Soderbergh's craft are also the demographics most comfortable watching at home. Brutal math for theatrical distributors. Critics recognize the quality immediately. Reviews praise Blanchett's performance, Soderbergh's visual control, and the film's refusal to spoon-feed answers. But critical acclaim doesn't move the needle anymore, not when audiences have infinite options and limited time. A 93-minute spy thriller starring Cate Blanchett should have found its crowd. That it didn't speaks to larger industry shifts that have nothing to do with the film's actual merit. Here's what matters: Black Bag works completely. It's Soderbergh doing what he does best, taking genre material and interrogating it through formal precision and character depth. This isn't reinventing the spy thriller so much as distilling it to pure essence. What happens when the person you're investigating sleeps next to you? What happens when love and duty collide and there's no clean answer? The film opened first in France on March 12, 2025, 2 days before the US release. European audiences have historically shown more patience for cerebral thrillers, though even there, Black Bag faced challenges finding its audience. The international box office added roughly 22 million to the domestic take, but those numbers still left the film well short of profitability in theatrical release. Soderbergh will be fine. He's operating in a space where budgets remain reasonable and creative freedom stays high. He's proven he can work outside the studio system when needed, and his efficiency means producers trust him to deliver on schedule and on budget. But Black Bag's financial underperformance raises questions about whether mid-budget adult dramas have any theatrical future at all, which makes the film itself even more valuable. A reminder that cinema can still operate at this register, telling stories about complicated people in morally ambiguous situations without pretending there are easy answers. Black Bag respects your intelligence. It trusts you to read subtext, to notice what's unsaid, to understand that sometimes the most devastating betrayals happen quietly across a breakfast table. The film opens with surveillance. Not the high-tech satellite imagery of a Bourne movie, but something far more intimate and unsettling. Kathryn Saintling. Jean sits in rooms where intelligence flows like water briefings, debriefings, the bureaucratic machinery of British intelligence grinding through its daily operations. Soderbergh establishes her world through accumulation rather than exposition. You learn who she is by watching her work, by noticing how colleagues defer to her judgment, by catching the weight she carries in her silence. Cate Blanchett plays Kathryn as someone who spent years building operational walls between her professional and personal lives. Then those walls get demolished in a single conversation. Her superior, likely Brosnan's Arthur Stieglitz, though the film's hierarchy deliberately stays somewhat opaque, presents evidence suggesting her husband George might be compromised. Not proven, not certain, just enough smoke to demand investigation. And here's where Black Bag separates itself from standard spy fare. Kathryn's reaction isn't movie shock with trembling hands and dramatic music swells. Blanchett plays it as someone receiving catastrophic news at work, contained, professional, already running calculations about what this means operationally before she processes what it means personally. The performance is a masterclass in compartmentalization. Michael Fassbender's George Woodhouse exists in that murky space where intelligence officers actually operate. He's not James Bond. He's not Jason Bourne. He's a middle-aged operative whose job involves more paperwork than parkour, more liaison meetings than gun battles. Fassbender brings a worn-in quality to George. This is someone who's been in the game long enough to know its toll, but not long enough to cash out. The marriage between Kathryn and George, as established in the early sequences, feels genuinely lived in. Soderbergh and Coep don't give us the shorthand of domestic bliss. No montages of laughter over wine. No precious moments that telegraph, remember this when everything falls apart. Instead, we get the realistic texture of true intelligent people who have built a life together while maintaining operational security even from each other. They have routines, private jokes, the muscle memory of long partnership, which makes the assignment Kathryn receives absolutely brutal. Investigate your husband without revealing you're investigating him. Every conversation becomes performance. Every intimate moment carries ulterior motive. Soderbergh films these domestic scenes with the same visual approach he uses for the intelligence work. Handheld, observational, refusing to signal whose perspective we are meant to trust. Next, David Coep's screenplay structure operates on multiple timelines. Though Soderbergh's editing keeps things linear, the investigation unfolds methodically. Kathryn begins by reviewing George's recent operational history, travel patterns, communication logs, meetings that might have provided opportunities for contact with hostile services. The film doesn't rush this procedural element. It trusts that watching competent professionals do their jobs generates its own tension. Pierce Brosnan's Arthur Stieglitz functions as the institutional voice, the embodiment of intelligence service priorities, where individual lives matter less than organizational security. Casting Brosnan, who spent years as the face of 007's wish fulfillment fantasy, as a weathered bureaucrat managing human assets like chess pieces? Chef's kiss. It's meta-casting that comments on spy mythology without being obnoxious about it. Brosnan plays exhaustion here, the accumulated moral compromise of decades spent in a world where betrayal is currency. The film's visual language deserves its own analysis, but even in these opening sequences, Soderbergh's approach becomes clear. He shoots London not as a tourist destination, but as a working city, grey, functional, full of anonymous spaces where clandestine meetings blend into everyday commerce. His camera observes rather than dramatizes. Long lens shots that feel stolen. Natural light that doesn't flatter. Compositions that prioritize spatial relationships over beauty. Regé. Jean Page's score. James Stokes enters as another layer of the intelligence apparatus. Military liaison or oversight, someone whose authority intersects with Kathryn's civilian intelligence role. Page brings gravitas without explanation, which fits the film's refusal to spell out organizational charts. You understand relationships through behavior and deference, not through exposition scenes that lay out who reports to whom. As Kathryn begins active surveillance of her own husband, the film's central tension crystallizes. She's hunting for proof, while secretly hoping she won't find it. George, unaware he's under suspicion, continues his daily patterns, which might be innocent routine or carefully maintained cover. Fassbender plays every scene with perfect ambiguity. Is that pause before answering a question, the hesitation of someone calculating their lies, or just a tired man trying to remember details from a busy week? Soderbergh films their home as a space transformed by suspicion. The bedroom where they sleep becomes an interrogation room. The kitchen where they make breakfast becomes a dead drop location, she mentally catalogues. Objects take on sinister possibility. That book George is reading, is he actually reading it, or is it a signal? The phone he checks obsessively, work stress, or contact with a handler. The paranoia doesn't announce itself with dramatic score or visual tricks. It accumulates through Blanchett's performance, the way Kathryn starts observing her husband like a target. She asks leading questions disguised as casual conversation. She creates opportunities to test his responses, and because she's skilled at this, George doesn't notice immediately. But Fassbender plays the slow dawning awareness beautifully. Moments where George catches something off in Kathryn's tone, a question that doesn't quite fit the context. Marisa Abela, Tom Burke, and Naomi Harris populate the intelligence ecosystem around the central marriage. Without detailed plot specifics, their functions likely involve the operational support system analysts, fellow officers, technical specialists who enable the surveillance work. Soderbergh populates his spy world with people who look like they actually work in government buildings, not with fashion models playing dress-up in tactical gear. The 93-minute runtime means Coep's script stays lean. No subplots about Kathryn's difficult childhood explaining why she's good at compartmentalizing. No scenes of George having drinks with buddies to establish what a regular guy he is. The film trusts that we understand these are complex adults without needing origin stories. It's refreshing how much Black Bag respects the audience's ability to meet it halfway. David Holmes' score works in the margins during these sequences. Electronic textures that create unease without overwhelming. The music suggests rather than states a low frequency rumble that might be ambient sound or might be emotional commentary. It's the opposite of melodramatic spy scores that tell you exactly how to feel during every beat. The London locations. Soderbergh chose feel deliberately unglamorous. Intelligence work happens in office parks and conference rooms, not exotic villas. When characters meet for clandestine conversations, it's in parking garages and chain cafes, spaces designed to be forgettable. Philip Messina's production design emphasizes functionality over style. These environments serve operational needs, nothing more. What's striking about the film's opening movement is how it inverts traditional spy thriller structure. Usually, we follow an investigation outward. The protagonist discovers a conspiracy and penetrates deeper into enemy territory. Here, Kathryn's investigation moves inward into her own home, her own marriage, her own capacity for betrayal in service of duty. The enemy isn't across borders. He might be across the breakfast table. Soderbergh's editing rhythm, he cuts under his Marianne Bernard pseudonym, prioritizes information density. Scenes don't linger past their functional purpose. A meeting ends when the necessary intel has been exchanged. A surveillance sequence concludes once Kathryn has learned what she came for. This efficiency means the 93-minute runtime feels packed with incident despite the lack of action sequences. Big D R rating manifests not through graphic content but through adult relationships depicted honestly. Kathryn and George's intimacy carries real weight because it's portrayed as something valuable being destroyed. When they're physically close, you feel both the genuine connection and the operational wall Kathryn's building between them. It's devastating precisely because it's understated. The investigation's methodology reveals Kathryn's tradecraft. She doesn't confront George directly. That would tip him off if he's guilty and wound him unnecessarily if he's innocent. Instead, she creates situations that test his responses, watches for inconsistencies between what he claims and what his behavior suggests. It's psychological chess, and Blanchett plays every move with focused intensity. George's work, from what we can gather, involves similar intelligence operations, liaison with foreign services, information sharing, the complex web of relationships that defines modern espionage. He travels for work. He takes meetings she can't know details about. Under normal circumstances, this operational security is standard. Now it's evidence. Soderbergh makes you feel how easily professional necessity becomes suspicious behavior once doubt enters the equation. Part 3. 67672555555555. Trust becomes the film's real currency, and it's a market in free fall. Kathryn starts noticing patterns that could mean everything or nothing. George takes a call and steps into another room. Normal behavior for someone handling classified information, or a guilty man hiding communication with a foreign handler. He claims a work trip to Brussels, but his credit card shows a charge in Zurich. When she asks about it, his explanation sounds reasonable. Maybe too reasonable. Fassbender delivers these lines with the perfect calibration. You genuinely can't tell if he's innocent and confused by her sudden interest in mundane details, or if he's a trained operative managing an interrogation disguised as marriage. The Zurich connection matters. Switzerland's neutrality makes it espionage's favorite playground. Everyone operates there because everyone else does. A meeting in Zurich could be legitimate intelligence work or a covert handoff to hostile services. Soderbergh shot on location there, capturing the sterile beauty of a city designed for discretion. When the film flashes back or shows surveillance footage from George's Swiss trip, the locations feel transactional. Hotels where nobody asks questions, cafes where conversations disappear into ambient noise. Kathryn's investigation pulls her deeper into George's operational history. She reviews old case files, looking for connections she might have missed. And here's where Coeb's screenplay gets nasty. She starts finding gaps. Not smoking guns gaps, meetings that aren't fully documented, expenses that don't quite match official travel records. Any one anomaly could be clerical error or security protocol. But accumulated, they form a pattern that's either damning evidence or the natural accumulation of 2 decades in intelligence work. Naomi Harris's doctor, Zoe Wong, likely functions as technical support or analytical assistance, someone Kathryn trusts to help dig through operational records without fully revealing why she's digging. These professional relationships carry their own tension. How much can Kathryn disclose about investigating her own husband before word gets back to the wrong people? The intelligence community is small. Everyone knows everyone. Rumors spread like contagion. The film's middle section sustains tension through conversational landmines. George and Kathryn have dinner. Simple enough, but every exchange carries double meaning. He mentions a colleague's name. Is he being transparent or testing whether she knows that colleague is under investigation? She asks about his day. Is it spousal interest or debriefing technique? Soderbergh holds shots longer than comfortable, letting silence do the heavy lifting. Blanchett and Fassbender play these scenes like a tennis match where the ball is made of nitroglycerin. Ju, Tom Burke's Freddie Smalls, enters the picture, probably another intelligence officer whose operational history intersects with George's. Without full plot details, his role likely complicates Kathryn's investigation. Maybe he's someone George worked with on cases that now look suspicious. Maybe he's another potential leak the service is monitoring. Burke brings nervous energy to the role, the vibe of someone who's in over their head and knows it. Mick Beers Brosnan's Arthur Stiglitz applies pressure on Kathryn to produce results. The service needs to know if George is compromised. Every day he remains in place with active clearances is a day hostile services could be accessing British intelligence. But moving too fast risks alerting him if he is guilty or destroying an innocent man's career if he is not. Brosnan plays these scenes with bureaucratic ruthlessness. Arthur cares about Kathryn's emotional state only insofar as it affects operational effectiveness. Her own observations, her own testimony about his behavior, his patterns, his unexplained absences. If this goes to trial or even an internal tribunal, she'll be the primary witness against her husband. That knowledge transforms how she moves through their shared life. Soderbergh's camera work in their home becomes increasingly claustrophobic. Earlier sequences showed their house as a comfortable space. Now the walls feel closer. The handheld camera crowds the actors, invading the intimate distance between them. Lighting stays naturalistic, but Soderbergh positions bodies to create visual barriers, door frames that separate them, furniture that blocks clear sightlines. The production design by Philip Messina emphasizes the home's transformation from sanctuary to operational theatre. George starts to suspect something's wrong. Not that he's under investigation necessarily, but that his marriage is fracturing. Fassbender plays the dawning awareness brilliantly. Moments where George tries to connect emotionally and Kathryn can't fully respond because she's in operator mode. He suggests they take a weekend away. She makes excuses about work. He notices she's withdrawn. She blames stress. Every deflection is technically true and fundamentally dishonest. The investigation uncovers a name. Someone George met with repeatedly, who shouldn't be in his network. Maybe a Russian intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover. Maybe a Chinese businessman with known state security connections. The specifics matter less than what it represents. Concrete evidence that George has been in contact with foreign services beyond his official duties. Kathryn brings this to Arthur, and Brosnan's reaction tells us everything. This is serious. But here's the twist, and Coep's screenplay earns this. George might have been running his own operation. Intelligence work involves double games, triple games, operations within operations. What looks like treason from one angle could be deep cover work from another. George's unauthorized contacts might be him recruiting assets or running back-channel communications, his superiors greenlit verbally but never put in writing. Plausible deniability cuts both ways. Regé John Page's Cole. James Stokes weighs in on the investigation, likely representing military intelligence's interest in the case. His presence suggests the compromise, if real extends beyond civilian services. Page plays authority with economy, making you understand stakes through posture and tone rather than exposition dumps. When he asks Kathryn pointed questions about her objectivity, the implication stings. Can she actually investigate her husband fairly? Kathryn wants George to be innocent. That desire compromises her investigative rigor in subtle ways. She interprets ambiguous evidence in his favor. She delays reporting certain findings while seeking alternative explanations. She's not sabotaging the investigation deliberately. She's human, and humans protect the people they love, even when duty demands otherwise. Blanchett shows this internal war through microscopic choices, the beat of hesitation before filing a report, the way her hand hovers over her phone before making a call she doesn't want to make. George's side of the story, assuming he's even aware he's under suspicion, remains largely opaque. The film keeps us locked in Kathryn's perspective, which means we only know what she knows. This structural choice creates maddening ambiguity. When George takes late-night calls and speaks in clipped sentences, we can't hear the other side of the conversation. When he leaves the house for emergency work meetings, we don't follow him. Soderbergh forces us to experience the paranoia of incomplete information. Marisa Abella's Clarissa Dubose likely represents another thread in the intelligence web, perhaps an analyst who's noticed similar anomalies, or an officer investigating parallel cases that intersect with George's activities. The ensemble structure means multiple people are pulling on the same threads from different directions, and eventually those threads start to tangle. The bureaucracy of espionage means information compartmentalizes, and nobody sees the complete picture except maybe Arthur, who's playing chess while everyone else plays checkers. The emotional toll on Kathryn manifests physically. Blanchett shows exhaustion accumulating. The way Kathryn's posture changes, her movements becoming more mechanical, her affect flattening. She is running on professional discipline while personal anguish corrodes her from inside. Sleep becomes impossible. Eating becomes perfunctory. The physical intimacy with George that used to be natural now feels like operational cover she has to maintain. And George notices. He's not stupid. Fassbender plays scenes where George actively studies his wife, trying to diagnose what's changed between them. He asks if she's having an affair. God, the irony, she denies it truthfully while dying inside because the real betrayal is so much worse than infidelity. She's treating their marriage as a surveillance operation, and there's no going back from that knowledge once it's conscious. The film's pace accelerates as evidence accumulates. Financial records show irregular deposits to an offshore account George controls, small amounts designed to avoid automated flags but systematic. When confronted, does Kathryn confront him directly or does the service bring him in? George's explanation sounds plausible until you examine it closely, then cracks appear. Dates don't align, supporting documentation is missing. His story has the shape of truth but not the substance. Soderbergh shoots confrontation scenes with devastating intimacy. No dramatic music. No stylized lighting, just two people in a room, maybe their bedroom, maybe an interrogation room where words become weapons and silence becomes confession. The handheld camera stays close, refusing to give either character breathing room. You feel trapped in the conversation, the same way they're trapped by circumstance. David Holmes' score drops out entirely during key moments, leaving only ambient sound. The hum of fluorescent lights, traffic noise bleeding through windows, the characters breathing. This sonic nakedness makes every word land harder. When emotions spike, there's no musical cushion to soften the impact. It's uncomfortable by design. George maintains his story with the consistency of someone who's either telling the truth or has rehearsed it to perfection. He explains the offshore account as a safety net, emergency funds for operations that might require off-book resources. Intelligence work sometimes demands immediate access to untraceable money. His superiors knew about it, or some of them did. The authorization exists somewhere in the bureaucratic maze, just not in writing where it could be subpoenaed or leaked. Except Arthur Stiglitz can't find that authorization. Brosnan delivers this revelation with the wariness of someone who's seen this exact scenario play out before. Either George is lying about approval or someone higher up the chain is hanging him out to dry. Both possibilities exist simultaneously in the moral fog of intelligence work. Plausible deniability means nobody's hands are ever completely clean or completely dirty. Kathryn's caught between institutional loyalty and personal devotion, and Blanchett plays this fracture with surgical precision. She wants to believe George. Every instinct in her personal life screams that this man she shared 2 decades with couldn't be a traitor. But her professional training recognizes the patterns. She's seen this before in other cases. The small compromises that snowball, the rationalization that starts with just this once and ends with systematic betrayal. The film introduces another wrinkle, compartmentalization within the service itself. Not everyone investigating George has the same information. Call. James Stokes operates from a military intelligence perspective with different access and different priorities. What he knows about George's activities doesn't fully overlap with what Kathryn knows or what Arthur knows. Reggie Page plays these scenes with strategic opacity. Stokes guards information the way everyone in this world guards information, parceling it out only when necessary. This bureaucratic fragmentation means truth becomes impossible to establish definitively. 3 people examine the same evidence and reach 3 different conclusions because they're each missing pieces the others possess. It's espionage as epistemological nightmare. You can never be certain because certainty requires complete information, and complete information doesn't exist in a system designed around compartmentalization and need-to-know protocols. George's behavior shifts as he realizes the walls closing in. Fassbender stops playing ambiguity and starts playing calculation. Whether he's guilty or innocent, George understands he's fighting for his career, his freedom, possibly his life. He becomes more careful with his words, more deliberate in his movements. The easiness that characterized his earlier scenes evaporates, replaced by a hyper-awareness that mirrors Kathryn's operational state. Their marriage exists now only as performance. They maintain appearances, going to work, coming home, sleeping in the same bed, but the substance has been hollowed out. Soderbergh films them moving through their house like ghosts haunting separate dimensions of the same space. They occupy the same frame but never quite connect. The blocking emphasizes distance even in proximity. Bodies angled away from each other, eye contact avoided. Tom Burke's Freddie Smalls becomes a pressure point in the investigation. His connection to George, whatever it is, creates additional vectors of suspicion. If George is compromised, did he compromise Freddie, or is Freddie the actual problem and George's proximity to him is coincidental? Burke plays mounting panic beautifully, the sense of a man watching his life unravel because of associations he can't fully explain or defend. The investigation methodology gets brutal. Kathryn has to analyze George's communications, which means reading personal messages between them through an operational lens. Love notes become potential coded signals. Inside jokes become suspect. Anniversary plans might be cover for a clandestine meeting. The work of suspicion is to drain innocent behavior of innocence, to transform intimacy into evidence. Marisa Abella's Clarissa Dubos probably provides analytical support, running patterns through databases, cross-referencing George's activities against known intelligence operations. This technical work generates the paper trail that will either exonerate or condemn him. Abella likely brings a detached professionalism. For her, this is a case file, not a marriage. That distance makes her effective, but also means she can't fully grasp what this investigation is costing. Kathryn personally, my peers Brosnan's Arthur pushes for resolution. The service can't sustain indefinite uncertainty. Either George is cleared and reinstated with full duties, or he is arrested and prosecuted. The liminal state of investigation serves nobody except maybe George, who remains free and potentially able to cause further damage if he is actually guilty. Arthur frames this in institutional terms, but Brosnan lets us see the human calculation underneath. He knows what this is doing to Kathryn, and he doesn't particularly care because operational security trumps individual welfare. The moral complexity kept screenplay explores isn't simple relativism. The film doesn't argue that everyone's equally compromised or that there's no difference between right and wrong. Instead, it examines how good people make terrible choices when systems demand impossible decisions. Kathryn isn't villainous for investigating her husband. She's doing her job. George isn't automatically villainous if he's guilty. Motivations for betrayal vary wildly, and some are more understandable than others. What if George was blackmailed? What if someone threatened a family or exploited a weakness he couldn't defend against? Espionage isn't a morality play with clear heroes and villains. It's a grinding machine that destroys people regardless of their intentions. Soderbergh's visual approach, the documentary style observation, the refusal to editorialize through camera angles or music reinforces this ambiguity. The film's London locations continue to emphasize institutional coldness. Government buildings with endless corridors, conference rooms where careers end during 15-minute meetings. The city itself becomes antagonistic, all grey skies and rain-slick streets that reflect nothing back clearly. Soderbergh shot this on location using natural light that refuses to flatter anyone or anything. The aesthetic is anti-glamour, anti-romance, anti-everything that spy movies usually celebrate. Sonnomi Harris's Dr. Zoe Vaughan potentially represents another dimension of intelligence work, psychological evaluation or debriefing services. Someone has to assess whether Kathryn's maintaining operational fitness while investigating her husband. Someone has to evaluate George's mental state and credibility. Harris likely brings calm professionalism to scenes that simmer with suppressed emotion, a character trained to observe without being swayed by performance. The evidence against George accumulates to a critical mass, but it never becomes definitive. That's the film's genius frustration. There's no smoking gun, no intercepted confession, no photographs of him handing documents to a Russian handler. Just a constellation of suspicious circumstances that suggest guilt without proving it. In a criminal court, this might not reach conviction threshold. In the intelligence world, reasonable suspicion is often sufficient for career termination and permanent security clearance revocation. George finally confronts Kathryn directly about what's happening. He's not stupid, he's connected the dots. Fassbender plays this scene with controlled fury, the rage of someone who feels betrayed by the person he trusted most. Even if he's guilty of espionage, he can feel legitimately wounded that his wife participated in his investigation. Even if he's innocent, the damage is done. She'll never look at him the same way again, and he knows it. Why Kathryn can't defend herself without revealing operational details she's not authorized to disclose. Blanchett shows the paralysis of conflicting duties. As a wife, she owes George honesty and loyalty. As an intelligence officer, she owes the service discretion and compliance with investigative protocols. These obligations exist in direct opposition, and there's no synthesis, no compromise that honors both. She has to choose, and whatever she chooses destroys something irreplaceable. The 93 minute runtime means this moral crisis doesn't sprawl into manufactured subplots. The film stays locked on the central dilemma, refusing to diffuse tension with extraneous action or side character stories. Everything serves the investigation and the marriage's disintegration. David Coeb's screenplay discipline is evident in what he chooses not to include. No flashbacks to happier times that would sentimentalize their relationship. No scenes of Kathryn confiding in a best friend to externalize internal conflict. The pressure escalates when external events force a timeline. Perhaps intelligence chatter suggests an imminent operation George might be facilitating. Perhaps a foreign service makes a move that can only be explained if they had advance warning George could have provided. The specifics matter less than the urgency they create. Decisions must be made now, not after another month of investigation. Cole. Stokes potentially recommends immediate detention based on risk assessment. From a security standpoint, it's logical. From a human standpoint, it's devastating. George would be arrested, held incommunicado, subjected to intensive interrogation. His life as he knows it ends the moment that order is executed, and Kathryn's testimony would be central to justifying that detention. My Arthur Stieglitz weighs operational necessity against potential blowback. If they detain George and he is innocent, the service faces internal turmoil and possible legal action. If they don't detain him and he is guilty, any subsequent damage is on their hands. Brosnan plays these calculations without sentimentality. Arthur's job is to make hard calls, and he's made harder ones than this. The film builds to a confrontation that's less about revelation than recognition. Maybe Kathryn and George finally speak honestly, stripped of operational postures and defensive maneuvering. Maybe they acknowledge what this investigation has killed regardless of George's guilt or innocence. Their marriage existed on a foundation of trust, and that foundation has been excavated, examined, and found structurally unsound. Even if they wanted to rebuild, the knowledge of what they've done to each other makes that impossible. Soderbergh films these final confrontation scenes with punishing intimacy. Close-ups that refuse to look away from pain. Long takes that force actors to sustain emotional intensity without cutting for relief. The technical mastery serves the story's emotional brutality. This has to hurt, and Soderbergh makes sure it does. But the resolution, if you can call it that, doesn't arrive with gunfire or chase sequences. This is where Black Bag commits fully to its anti-thriller instincts. There's no dramatic shootout in a warehouse, no last-minute escape across European borders, just a conference room or maybe their living room where the accumulated weight of evidence and suspicion finally collapses into decision. Soderbergh understands that the real violence in espionage isn't physical, it's bureaucratic, emotional, the kind that leaves no visible scars but permanently alters everyone involved. George's fate likely hinges on incomplete information and institutional risk tolerance. The evidence suggests guilt without proving it beyond reasonable doubt. In intelligence work, that's often sufficient. Better to sacrifice one potentially innocent officer than risk catastrophic compromise if he is actually guilty. It's cold calculus, and the film doesn't flinch from that coldness. Yet Kathryn faces her own reckoning. Even if her investigation was professionally competent, she's destroyed her marriage. Blanchett plays the aftermath with hollow exhaustion. Someone who's won operationally and lost everything personally, the service might commend her dedication. They might even promote her for prioritizing duty over personal loyalty. But she'll spend the rest of her life wondering if she was right, if the evidence she gathered actually proved what she concluded, or if she participated in destroying an innocent man who happened to be her husband. The genius of David Coeb's screenplay structure is that it denies catharsis. Audiences trained on conventional spy thrillers expect revelation, the moment when all ambiguity resolves into clarity. Black Bag refuses that comfort. The ending, whatever its specific details, likely maintains the uncertainty that's plagued the investigation from the start. Maybe George confesses, but his confession raises more questions than it answers. Maybe he maintains innocence to the end, and we never know if that's truth or final tradecraft. Pierce Brosnan's Arthur Stieglitz delivers the institutional verdict, and his performance likely carries the weight of someone who's executed this duty before. Casting former James Bond as the voice of bureaucratic ruthlessness pays off in these final scenes. Arthur might express regret about collateral damage, might even acknowledge Kathryn's sacrifice, but the machine moves forward regardless. Individual suffering doesn't halt operational imperatives. The supporting ensemble, Reggie John Page's Cole, Stokes, Naomi Harris's Doctor, Wong, Tom Burke's Freddie Smalls, Marisa Abella's Clarissa Dubose, each likely carries a piece of the resolution's implications. If George is detained or prosecuted, it affects everyone in his operational network. Cases he worked on get reviewed, assets he recruited become suspect. The contamination spreads through the entire system because that's how compartmentalized organizations operate. Once trust is breached, suspicion metastasizes. Michael Fassbender's final scenes, again without knowing exact plot specifics, probably showcase someone grappling with betrayal from multiple directions. If he's guilty, he's betrayed his country, his service, and his wife. If he's innocent, he's been betrayed by the institution he served and the partner he loved. Either way, Fassbender likely plays the emotional devastation with the same controlled intensity he's maintained throughout. George doesn't break down dramatically because intelligence officers don't. They're trained to compartmentalize even total life collapse. The marriage itself reaches a conclusion that feels less like resolution and more like amputation. Maybe they separate formally. Maybe they stay married on paper while living completely separate lives. Maybe one of them leaves intelligence work entirely, unable to continue in an environment that demanded such personal sacrifice. Soderbergh probably doesn't spell out the logistics because they're beside the point. The relationship as it existed is dead and both parties know it. What makes this brutal is that there's no villain to blame. Arthur was doing his job. Kathryn was doing hers. George, guilty or innocent, was caught in a system that demands absolute loyalty while offering zero protection when that loyalty is questioned. The real antagonist is the structure itself, the bureaucratic intelligence apparatus that treats human beings as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be eliminated. The film's 93-minute runtime means the ending arrives without excessive epilogue. No, where are they now? Text cards, no scenes, 6 months later, showing everyone moved on. Soderbergh likely cuts close to the emotional wound, ending while it's still raw. This refusal to provide temporal distance or perspective forces viewers to sit with the discomfort, to grapple with the moral ambiguity without reassurance that time heals all wounds. David Holmes' score probably strips down to almost nothing in these final sequences. Maybe just ambient sound breathing, footsteps, the mechanical hum of institutional spaces. The absence of music becomes its own statement. There is no emotional orchestration because the situation doesn't allow for processed grief or triumphant closure. It just ends and everyone has to live with what happened. The visual approach Soderbergh maintains throughout reaches its starkest expression in the finale. Shooting as Peter Andrews, he likely keeps the camera observational to the end handheld, but steady, close, but not invasive, documenting rather than dramatizing. The natural lighting in London's perpetually overcast atmosphere reinforces the moral grayness. Nothing is illuminated clearly. Everything exists in shadow and half-light. Philip Messina's production design probably emphasizes the institutional environments where careers end. Interrogation rooms designed for psychological pressure. Offices where personnel files get stamped with classification codes that effectively end someone's professional life. These spaces look mundane because they are. The machinery of institutional power operates through paperwork and protocols, not dramatic confrontations. The question of George's actual guilt or innocence might remain deliberately unanswered. This isn't narrative cowardice, it's thematic precision. The point isn't whether George betrayed his country. The point is what the investigation cost, regardless of its accuracy. Kathryn had to choose between personal loyalty and institutional duty, and she chose duty. Whether that choice was objectively correct becomes irrelevant compared to its irreversible consequences. Some viewers will find this maddening. We are conditioned to expect answers, especially in spy thrillers where revelation is currency. But Black Bag operates in the epistemological nightmare of real intelligence work, where certainty is luxury and decisions get made based on probability and risk assessment. Living with uncertainty isn't a plot flaw. It's the actual texture of this world. The performances in these climactic scenes likely strip away all protective artifice. Blanchett and Fassbender probably play exhaustion, not movie exhaustion with artfully smudged makeup, but the genuine depletion of people who have been operating in crisis mode for weeks. Their bodies move differently, their voices carry different weight, the accumulation of stress manifests physically. If there's a final conversation between Kathryn and George, it probably happens without the operational masks they've been wearing. Just two people acknowledging what they've lost and what they've done to each other. Soderbergh likely films this with brutal simplicity, too short, medium distance, letting the actors do the work without camera gymnastics. The blocking probably emphasizes the gulf between them even in the same frame. A perspective that evaluates this entire crisis in terms of organization, terms of organizational impact. Page's military bearing terms of organizational impact. Page's military bearing serves the role perfectly. He can act. Personnel are replaceable. Operations continue. The service endures even when individuals don't. The R ratings value becomes clearest in these final scenes. Adult consequences require adult treatment. If this were sanitized to PG-13, the ending would need to soften to provide hope or closure that would undermine the thematic point. The rating gives Soderbergh permission to let the ending hurt without offering false comfort. B. Tom Burke's Freddy probably faces collateral damage from George's investigation, guilty by association, or at least suspicious by proximity. Burke likely plays the injustice of this with barely controlled rage, someone whose career is destroyed not because he did anything wrong, but because he worked with someone who maybe did something wrong. That's how contamination spreads in intelligence circles. Marisa Abella's Clarissa moves on to the next case because analysts always do. For her, this was a particularly messy file, but ultimately just another file. That professional distance necessary for the work highlights how differently people experience the same events. Kathryn's life is destroyed. Clarissa's Tuesday is inconvenient. The film's ending probably doesn't offer redemption arcs or paths to healing. Soderbergh isn't interested in reassuring viewers that everything works out eventually. Sometimes investigations destroy innocent people. Sometimes guilty people escape consequences. Sometimes everyone loses regardless of how the facts align. That's not cynicism. It's honesty about how institutions function and what they demand from individuals who serve them. Arthur Stieglitz likely survives professionally unscathed, maybe even enhanced. He made hard calls and protected the service. Brosnan probably plays the final scenes with grim satisfaction, not joy in anyone's suffering, but the professional contentment of someone who managed a crisis by institutional standards. For Arthur, this operation succeeded even if it destroyed everyone directly involved. The Zurich locations from earlier in the film probably echo in the ending. Maybe George's Swiss contacts were legitimate intelligence work. Maybe they were his downfall. The city's neutral elegance stands in sharp contrast to the emotional carnage the investigation produced. Switzerland allows everyone to operate, but it doesn't care about the casualties. Dika, Kathryn's future in intelligence work remains uncertain. Can she continue operating effectively after what this cost her? Does she want to? The film probably doesn't answer these questions explicitly because Kathryn herself doesn't know. She exists in the immediate aftermath, still processing trauma, while institutional expectations demand she move forward to the next assignment. Bah! The final images Soderbergh chooses likely emphasize isolation. Individuals in separate frames or separate spaces, the connections between them severed irrevocably. Maybe Kathryn alone in the house she shared with George, surrounded by the physical artifacts of a marriage that no longer exists in any meaningful sense. Maybe George in detention or relocated somewhere, starting over with nothing. Whatever the specific resolution, Black Bag probably ends on ambiguity rather than closure. That's the film's final refusal to comfort. It doesn't wrap up neatly because the situations it depicts don't wrap up neatly. People continue carrying the weight of decisions made under impossible circumstances. Institutions continue demanding impossible choices from new personnel. The cycle perpetuates. Soderbergh shoots Black Bag like he's allergic to beauty. That's not an insult. It's the entire aesthetic strategy. Working under his cinematography pseudonym Peter Andrews, Soderbergh deliberately strips away the visual seduction that typically defines spy cinema. No golden hour glamour shots of London landmarks, no meticulously color-graded frames that look like perfume commercials. Just functional, observational camera work that prioritizes clarity over style. The result feels almost documentary in its approach, like we are watching actual surveillance footage of lies unraveling in real time. The handheld camera becomes a character in itself, present but not intrusive, mobile but not showy. Soderbergh uses the slight instability of handheld work to create subliminal unease. Nothing is quite locked down. The frame breathes and shifts minutely, keeping viewers slightly off balance without calling attention to the technique. It's the visual equivalent of chronic anxiety, that low-grade tension that never fully resolves. Natural lighting dominates the film's visual palette. London's perpetually overcast skies provide diffused illumination that flattens contrast and drains warmth from the image. Interior scenes rely on practical sources, lamps, overhead fixtures, window light, rather than supplemental film lighting that would sculpt faces dramatically. The effect is unglamorous in the extreme. Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender, two of cinema's most striking faces, look exhausted and ordinary under Soderbergh's harsh realism. This lighting approach serves thematic purpose. The few moments of visual elegance, maybe some Zurich locations with their alpine light, stand out precisely because the rest of the film denies that aesthetic pleasure. D. The 93-minute runtime reflects Soderbergh's famous efficiency as both shooter and editor. Working under the editing pseudonym Marianne Bernard, he cuts with surgical precision. Scenes don't linger past their functional purpose. A conversation ends when necessary information has been exchanged. A surveillance sequence concludes once the relevant behavior has been documented. This discipline creates propulsive momentum despite the lack of action sequences. Soderbergh's editing rhythm prioritizes information density over emotional manipulation. He doesn't cut to reaction shots to tell you how to feel. He doesn't use montage to compress time dramatically. Instead, the cuts feel almost clinical. This happened, then this, then this. The causality remains clear even as moral implications stay murky. It's editing that respects viewer intelligence, trusting us to connect dots without visual hand-holding. The color palette stays muted throughout. Desaturated blues and grays dominate, creating a visual environment that mirrors the emotional temperature. Nothing pops. Nothing vibrates with intensity. The production designed by Philip Messina emphasizes institutional bigas and government building neutrals. These are spaces designed to be forgettable, and the color grading reinforces that deliberate blandness. But within that restricted palette, Soderbergh finds visual variation through composition and framing. The way he blocks actors within the space, using door frames to separate characters, placing furniture as physical barriers, positioning bodies to create sightlines or block them, demonstrates sophisticated visual storytelling. You can often read power dynamics and emotional states purely through spatial relationships before anyone speaks. David Holmesco operates with similar restraint. The longtime Soderbergh collaborator, they've worked together since the Ocean's films, knows how to create atmosphere without overwhelming scenes. The music in Black Bag pulses underneath dialogue, electronic textures that suggest unease without announcing themselves. It's the opposite of melodramatic spy scores that telegraph danger or emotion. Holmes trusts silence almost as much as Soderbergh does. When music does appear, it's often minimal, a sustained bass tone, a rhythmic element that matches footsteps or heartbeats, synthesizer pads that hover at the edge of perception. The score never tells you how to feel. It enhances the paranoia already present in the narrative and performances without adding external emotional commentary. Some of the film's most intense moments probably play without any score at all, just ambient sound and dialogue. The sound design deserves equal analysis. Soderbergh's films always pay attention to acoustic environments. The way spaces sound, how conversations carry or don't, the intrusive noise of modern life. In Black Bag, sound probably emphasizes the invasive nature of surveillance work. Electronics humming, keys clicking, phones buzzing. The sonic texture of intelligence work isn't dramatic, it's repetitive and mechanical. Dialogue mixing likely stays naturalistic, avoiding the hyper clarity of most Hollywood productions. People talk over each other occasionally. Background noise sometimes obscures words. This acoustic realism serves the documentary aesthetic, making conversations feel stolen rather than performed. When characters speak quietly in public spaces, you strain to hear them the same way actual surveillance requires training to capture usable audio. The camera's relationship to the actors reveals Soderbergh's trust in his ensemble. He doesn't use close-ups as emotional punctuation. Instead, he tends to hold medium shots and two shots, letting actors work within the frame rather than fragmenting performances into isolating close-ups. This creates a viewing experience that feels more observational, like we're in the room rather than being shown carefully curated emotional moments. When Soderbergh does push in for close-ups, likely during key confrontations or moments of realization, they land with increased impact precisely because they're not overused. The visual grammar stays economical. Every choice carries weight because excess has been eliminated. It's filmmaking as efficiency study, removing everything that doesn't directly serve story or character. The production design by Philip Messina transforms London locations into functional intelligence world environments. Government offices look appropriately anonymous. Conference rooms feel interchangeable. Even Kathryn and George's home, probably their most personal space, reflects the careful curation of people who understand that environments communicate information. Nothing is accidental. Everything is positioned. Messina's work shines in the small details that authenticate the world. Computers that look actually used rather than props. Paperwork that suggests real bureaucratic systems. Office equipment that shows wear. These aren't Instagram-ready spaces. They're the functional environments where actual work happens, and Messina captures that unglamorous reality. The Zurich sequences probably provide the film's only real visual luxury. Switzerland's architecture and alpine light offer natural elegance that even Soderbergh's austere approach can't completely neutralize. But even there, he likely shoots for functionality rather than tourism. The locations matter for operational reasons, neutral ground, banking secrecy, diplomatic convenience, not for their scenic qualities. Soderbergh's efficiency as a filmmaker creates interesting production dynamics. He operates camera, which means he's making framing decisions in real time rather than watching a monitor while someone else shoots. This creates immediate feedback between directorial vision and visual execution. When he edits his own footage, he is cutting material he personally captured, understanding intimately what was happening on set during each take. This level of control could produce self-indulgent results in less disciplined hands. But Soderbergh's aesthetic is fundamentally about reduction rather than addition. He is constantly asking what can be removed while maintaining narrative clarity. The 93-minute runtime represents successful elimination of fat. Every scene earns its presence. Every shot serves multiple functions, advancing plot, revealing character, establishing environment. The film's visual language creates interesting parallels between surveillance work and cinema itself. Both involve watching people without their full awareness. Both require interpreting behavior and motivation from observed evidence. Soderbergh makes this connection explicit through his camera work. We watch Kathryn watching George, and the film's aesthetic mirrors the uncomfortable voyeurism inherent in both espionage and moviegoing. His framing choices often position viewers as surveillance apparatus. We see through doorways, past obstacles, from angles that suggest hidden cameras or long lenses. This creates complicity. We are not innocent observers, but active participants in the invasion of privacy that the investigation requires. The visual style implicates us in the ethical compromises the characters face. The handheld work also serves practical purposes beyond aesthetic ones. Soderbergh can move quickly, following actors through spaces without elaborate dolly setups or steadicam rigs. This speed of execution kept production lean and allowed for improvisation when useful. The slightly rough visual texture that results becomes a feature rather than a bug, reinforcing the documentary feel. Editing as Mary Ann Bernard, Soderbergh maintains precise control over pacing. He's talked in interviews about editing while shooting, assembling sequences in his head before footage even gets captured. This pre-visualization means he shoots economically, not wasting time or resources on coverage he won't use. The 93-minute runtime reflects this efficiency. He didn't shoot a 3-hour movie and cut it down. He shot a 93-minute movie. The rhythm of cuts, creates its own subliminal commentary. Quick cuts during investigation sequences suggest information accumulation, pieces clicking together. Longer takes during personal confrontations force viewers to endure discomfort without relief. The editing never lets you off the hook. When scenes are hard to watch, Soderbergh holds the moment rather than cutting away. His use of actual London locations rather than soundstage recreations grounds the film geographically. We are not in movie London with its greatest hits landmarks. We are in working London office districts, residential streets, anonymous urban spaces where actual people live and work. This geographic specificity prevents the film from floating in the generic spy thriller ether where location is just exotic wallpaper. The Pinewood Studios would probably involve controlled environments where specific technical needs, certain lighting setups, repeatable conditions required stage shooting, but Soderbergh minimizes the visual difference between location and stage work, maintaining consistent aesthetic across all environments. Nothing feels opened up or artificially expanded. Every space has functional dimensions. Cate Blanchett's performance as Kathryn St. Jean represents career-best restraint from an actor known for bold choices. She could have played this big tortured wife, anguished patriot, woman torn between impossible loyalties. Instead, Blanchett goes internal, creating a character who lives almost entirely behind operational masks. Kathryn's professional training has taught her to compartmentalize, and we watch that training both protect and destroy her. The performance exists in micro-expressions, the momentary flicker before her face resets to neutral, the hand that reaches for her husband then pulls back, the pauses before responding that suggest calculation rather than spontaneity. What makes Blanchett's work so devastating is how she charts Kathryn's gradual hollowing out. Early in the film, there is still separation between her work self and her home self. By the end, there is only work self, the operator who can't stop running analysis even in moments that should be purely personal. Blanchett shows us someone losing the ability to access genuine emotion because survival requires constant performance. It's the opposite of showboating, and it's absolutely brilliant. Michael Fassbender matches her restraint with his own brand of control ambiguity. George Woodhouse never resolves into clear innocence or guilt, and that's Fassbender's achievement. He plays every scene with perfect deniability. You can read his behavior as the wounded confusion of an innocent man being investigated by his wife or as the careful management of a trained operative whose cover is threatened. That ambiguity isn't vagueness, it's precision work that requires calibrating every line reading and physical gesture. Fassbender's eyes do extraordinary work throughout. They convey hurt, calculation, love, potential deception, often simultaneously. When George looks at Kathryn, you see the marriage they had and the chasm opening between them. When he is questioned about his activities, his gaze holds steady in ways that could be honesty or expert tradecraft. The performance never tips its hand, which means we experience the same maddening uncertainty Kathryn faces. The chemistry between Blanchett and Fassbender feels lived in and authentic. These aren't movie stars playing attraction. They're actors creating a decades-long partnership with its own rhythms, inside jokes, and accumulated history. The tragedy of the film lands because we believe they genuinely love each other, which makes the investigation's corrosive effect on that love unbearable to watch. Their scenes together crackle with subtext, every innocuous exchange potentially loaded with operational meaning. Mia, Pierce Brosnan's Arthur Stieglitz, represents the film's most pointed piece of casting. Brosnan embodied Bond's fantasy version of espionage, the glamorous operative who saves the world and beds beautiful women without moral complication. Here, he plays the institutional machinery that chews up operatives like Bond and spits them out. Arthur has survived by prioritizing the service over individuals, and Brosnan plays that survival with weary cynicism. He's seen this scenario before. He'll see it again. The personnel change, but the machine endures. There's genuine pathos in Brosnan's performance. Arthur isn't a villain, just someone who's made peace with impossible choices. When he pressures Kathryn to produce results, it's not cruelty, it's operational necessity. When he makes decisions that destroy lives, it's not personal, it's risk management. Brosnan brings decades of screen presence to create a character who's essentially the ghost of Christmas future for Kathryn. This is what you become if you survive long enough in this world. Leggerege John Page's call. James Stokes operates with military precision and bearing. Page doesn't have extensive screen time, but he makes every moment count. Stokes represents a different branch of the intelligence apparatus with its own priorities and protocols. Page plays inter-agency dynamics through subtle power moves. Who speaks first? Who defers to whom? Whose assessment carries more weight? Its adult professional behavior rendered dramatically interesting through sharp performance choices. May Naomi Harris brings calm professionalism to Dr. Call. Zoe Wong likely providing psychological or analytical support to the investigation. Harris specializes in playing competent professionals, and she deploys that skill here to create someone who's seen the human cost of intelligence work but maintains necessary distance. Her scenes probably provide moments of relative honesty, someone Kathryn can speak to with slightly less operational guard, though never fully unmasked. Biko, Tom Burke's Freddie Smalls and Marisa Abella's Clarissa Dubose round out the ensemble with specific functions in the intelligence ecosystem. Burke brings nervous energy, someone aware he's caught in something larger than his pay grade. Abela likely plays analytical competence, the technical expertise that generates evidence others interpret. Both actors create fully realized characters despite limited screen time, populating the film's world with people who feel like they exist beyond their scenes. The ensemble work reflects Soderbergh's directorial approach. No one's playing for spotlight. Everyone serves the story rather than building individual showcase moments. This creates a cohesive world where intelligence work feels institutional rather than individualistic. These aren't lone wolves or maverick agents, they're bureaucrats navigating complex organizational structures while managing personal costs. Thematically, Black Bag explores trust as both professional necessity and personal vulnerability. Intelligence work requires trusting colleagues with your life while simultaneously maintaining operational security that assumes everyone could be compromised. That paradox, trust is essential but potentially fatal, creates the psychological torture at the film's core. Kathryn must trust the evidence against George while wanting desperately not to. George must maintain operational security even from his wife, which makes him look guilty regardless of actual innocence. The film examines how institutions demand impossible loyalty. Kathryn must choose between her marriage and her duty, and there's no synthesis that honors both commitments. The service requires her to investigate George thoroughly, which means treating him as a suspect rather than a partner. But her marriage requires trust and loyalty, which the investigation fundamentally betrays. Whatever she chooses, she loses something irreplaceable. Soderbergh and Coep explore the epistemological nightmare of incomplete information. Intelligence work operates in conditions of radical uncertainty. Decisions must be made based on probability rather than proof, and the consequences of those decisions are catastrophic for the individuals involved. George might be guilty, he might be innocent. The available evidence doesn't conclusively establish either, but the machinery of institutional response grinds forward anyway because inaction carries its own risks. But that performative skill bleeds into personal life until the boundary between genuine self and operational persona becomes porous. Kathryn and George's marriage existed partly on shared understanding of this duality. The investigation destroys that understanding by weaponizing the performative skills they both possess. Black Bag also interrogates the costs institutions externalize onto individuals. The intelligence service benefits from Kathryn's dedication and George's operational experience. But when crisis hits, the service protects itself by sacrificing personnel. Arthur can make career-ending decisions about subordinates while his own position remains secure. The film doesn't present this as conspiracy or particular villainy. It's simply how bureaucracies function, prioritizing institutional survival over individual welfare. The spy genre typically offers either fantasy wish fulfillment, Bond, or paranoid conspiracy Bond. Black Bag rejects both templates in favor of something more mundane and devastating. The bureaucratic reality of intelligence work as job that demands everything while offering minimal protection when things go wrong. There's no glamour here, no exotic locales that distract from moral implications, no action sequences that provide cathartic release from tension. Soderbergh's visual austerity serves the thematic content perfectly. By stripping away spy genre glamour, he forces viewers to confront the actual human costs of espionage, the unglamorous lighting, the documentary camera work, the muted color palette. All of it reinforces that this isn't fantasy, it's the grinding reality behind the mythology. The 93-minute runtime becomes thematic statement, efficiency as aesthetic and operational principle. Intelligence work values economy, minimum resources for maximum effect, clean operations that don't leave messy trails. Soderbergh applies that logic to filmmaking itself. No wasted shots, no indulgent sequences, nothing that doesn't serve story or character. The form mirrors the content. Black Bag's commercial failure, despite critical recognition, highlights the challenging market for adult dramas. A 43.4 million worldwide gross against a 50.60 million budget means theatrical losses that streaming revenues must recoup. But box office isn't quality measure, it's simply evidence that audiences increasingly reserve theatrical attendance for spectacle rather than substance. The film Soderbergh made doesn't compromise for commercial appeal, and that integrity matters more than receipts. What makes Black Bag essential viewing is its commitment to honesty about a world usually depicted through fantasy. Real espionage destroys lives quietly, through bureaucratic processes and moral compromises that leave no visible scars. Real betrayal happens across breakfast tables, not in spectacular action set pieces. Real investigations grind people down through accumulated uncertainty rather than dramatic revelation. The film trusts viewers to handle ambiguity, moral complexity, and uncomfortable implications without resolution. That's rare in any genre, but especially in spy thrillers where audiences typically expect clear heroes and villains. Black Bag offers only human beings making terrible choices under impossible circumstances, and it refuses to judge those choices simplistically. Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender deliver career-defining work precisely because they resist the temptation to make their characters sympathetic through conventional means. Kathryn isn't heroic, she is complicit in destroying her husband whether he is guilty or not. George isn't clearly innocent, his behavior creates legitimate suspicion regardless of actual guilt. Both actors play the moral murkiness without seeking viewer absolution. Brosnan's meta-casting pays off throughout, his presence constantly reminding us of spy cinema's usual fantasy while delivering brutal reality. Every scene with Arthur Stieglitz implicitly asks, what happens to Bond after the mission when the bureaucracy demands accounting for collateral damage? Brosnan's performance answers. He becomes this, a functionary managing human costs through paperwork. The supporting ensemble creates a world that feels institutional and systemic rather than focused on individual heroics. Regé Page, Naomi Harris, Tom Burke, Marissa Abela. Each contributes to the sense that intelligence work involves dozens of people performing specific functions, all interconnected, all capable of being contaminated by one person's potential compromise. Soderbergh's technical mastery shooting as Peter Andrews, editing as Marianne Bernard results in complete authorial control. The vision is singular, unified, uncompromised by competing creative inputs. That level of control allows for the sustained austerity that defines the film's aesthetic. A more conventional production would have introduced commercial compromises that softened the bleakness. David Holmes' score and the sound design work in tandem to create pervasive unease without melodrama. The music never tells you what to feel. It amplifies the paranoia already present in the narrative and performances. The sonic environment emphasizes the invasive nature of surveillance, the way intelligence work transforms every space into potential operational theater. Philip Messina's production design authenticates the world through accumulation of unglamorous detail. These environments feel genuinely inhabited by people who work in intelligence bureaucracy, not by movie characters visiting sets designed to look cool. The functional blandness serves thematic purpose. This work happens in forgettable spaces precisely because memorability would compromise operational security. Black Bag represents Soderbergh at his most disciplined and uncompromising. He takes genre material, the spy thriller, and interrogates it through formal rigor and thematic depth. The result doesn't reinvent the wheel so much as strip the wheel down to essential components, examining what remains when you remove fantasy, glamour, and easy moral certainty. The film asks difficult questions without providing comfortable answers. What do you owe your spouse versus your country? How do you maintain humanity while performing inhumane duties? Can love survive systematic betrayal? even if that betrayal serves legitimate institutional needs? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're genuine dilemmas the characters must navigate, and the film respects them enough not to pretend there are clean solutions. For viewers willing to meet it on its own austere terms, Black Bag offers something increasingly rare: intelligent adult cinema that treats its audience as capable of handling moral complexity. It's a film that rewards attention, that operates through accumulation and implication rather than exposition and spectacle. Soderbergh trusts you to do the work of interpretation, to sit with discomfort, to leave without cathartic resolution. The 93-minute runtime means there's no fat to cut, no excess to trim. What you get is pure distilled essence of this particular story, told by this particular filmmaker at the peak of his craft. Every frame serves purpose. Every performance choice connects to theme. Every technical decision reinforces the whole. Black Bag won't be for everyone. It's deliberately paced, emotionally punishing, and morally ambiguous in ways that frustrate viewers seeking clear heroes and satisfying conclusions. But for those who appreciate cinema that operates at this register, intelligent, formally rigorous, thematically rigid, it's essential. Soderbergh has crafted a spy thriller that's actually about something beyond its plot mechanics, and that's achievement worth celebrating regardless of box office receipts. Scene construction in Black Bag operates on strategic omission. Soderbergh and Coep make fascinating choices about what to show versus what to withhold. Traditional spy thrillers front-load exposition, the mission briefing where someone explains stakes and objectives while slides project on screens. Black Bag skips that entirely. We enter the investigation in progress, learning operational details through fragments and context clues rather than explicit explanation. This demands active viewership. You have to piece together the intelligence apparatus's hierarchy, the specific nature of George's alleged compromise, and the institutional politics at play. B. The elliptical storytelling mirrors actual intelligence work where nobody has complete information. Kathryn receives briefings with redacted sections. Arthur knows things he doesn't share. George's perspective remains largely inaccessible except through his interactions with Kathryn. This structural choice, restricting viewer knowledge to roughly what Kathryn knows, creates authentic uncertainty. We are not omniscient observers. We are trapped in the same epistemic fog she navigates. Consider how this contrasts with Thomas Alfredson's Tinker Tailor Soldier, Soldier Spy, 2011, another recent meditation on unglamorous espionage. That film also embraces ellipsis and demands attention, but its period setting and adaptation source provide different constraints. Tinker Tailor excavates Cold War paranoia through literary structure, multiple timelines, extensive flashbacks, the slow accumulation of historical detail. Black Bag stays relentlessly present, tense, contemporary, stripping away the nostalgic distance that period pieces inherently create. Both films share commitment to procedural realism over action spectacle, but Soderbergh's approach feels even more austere. Where Tinker Tailor allowed Gary Oldman's George Smiley moments of quiet triumph, the intellectual satisfaction of solving the puzzle, Black Bag denies everyone triumph. Kathryn's investigation yields no satisfying resolution, just institutional necessity grinding forward regardless of personal cost. The Lives of Others, 2006, provides another useful comparison: surveillance destroying the surveillors. Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck's film about Stasi surveillance in East Germany explores how watching people intimately transforms the watcher. Captain Wiesler becomes invested in the lives he's monitoring, ultimately compromised by empathy. Kathryn experiences something similar but more devastating because she's not observing strangers, she's weaponizing intimate knowledge of her husband. The moral stakes differ crucially. Wiesler achieves redemption through betraying an authoritarian state. Kathryn betrays her husband to serve democratic institutions that are theoretically legitimate. Black Bag doesn't offer the clean satisfaction of resisting tyranny. Instead, it asks what happens when the system you serve is defensible, but the costs it demands are unbearable. Steven Spielberg's Munich 2005 explored moral corrosion through state-sanctioned violence. Avner's assassination team slowly disintegrates psychologically as they execute revenge operations against Palestinian targets. The film examined whether democratic states can employ undemocratic methods without corrupting themselves. Black Bag asks related questions about surveillance, investigation, and institutional betrayal, but where Munich delivered Spielbergian emotional clarity. We know how to feel about the violence. Black Bag maintains ambiguity to the end. Mika, within Soderbergh's own filmography, Black Bag represents thematic culmination of concerns he's explored across decades. Traffic 2000 dissected institutional failure through multiple perspectives on the drug war. The Informant 2009 turned corporate whistleblowing into tragicomic character study where the whistleblower's own corruption undermines his testimony. Side Effects 2003 weaponized psychiatric care in a thriller about manipulation and pharmaceutical ethics. All these films share interest in systems that consume individuals while maintaining institutional continuity. Black Bag applies that interest to intelligence work with characteristic precision. Like The Informant, it questions the reliability of perspective. Can we trust what we are seeing when everyone's a trained performer? Like Traffic, it suggests systemic problems can't be solved by individual action. Like Side Effects, it explores how professional relationships become sites of exploitation and betrayal. But Black Bag might be Soderbergh's bleakest film because it offers no satirical distance or moral clarity. The Informant could be darkly funny because Matt Damon's character was so clearly unreliable. Traffic ended with Michael Douglas's character making a personal choice that felt redemptive even if systemically futile. Black Bag denies consolation. There is no good choice, no redemptive gesture, just damage accumulation and institutional momentum. David Coeb's screenplay demonstrates expert structural discipline. He's written massive blockbusters, Jurassic Park, Mission, Impossible, Spider-Man, which requires different skills than intimate character drama. But Coeb's best work has always involved paranoia and systems failure. Stir of Echoes 1999 weaponized suburban normalcy. Premium Rush 2012 turned bicycle courier work into sustained tension. He understands how to generate suspense from procedural detail rather than manufactured peril. The dialogue in Black Bag sounds authentic to how intelligent people actually communicate. Characters speak in incomplete sentences sometimes, use jargon without explaining it, reference shared knowledge through shorthand. Coeb resists the temptation to make everyone eloquent or profound. Intelligence officers aren't poets. They are bureaucrats who happen to work in classified environments. The language reflects that reality. Notice how interrogation scenes probably avoid the theatrical confrontation, typical of spy thrillers. No, you were the mole all along. Revelations with dramatic music swells. Instead, careful questioning that builds circumstantial cases through accumulated detail. Can you explain this meeting? What was the purpose of this transfer? Questions that sound innocuous but trap the subject into either lies that can be verified or admissions that confirm suspicion. Coeb structures information revealed economically. A detailed mention in passing early. George's unexplained Zurich charge becomes evidence later. This rewards attention without being precious about it. The screenplay doesn't wink at viewers or congratulate them for noticing connections. It simply lays track efficiently and trusts the train will stay on rails. D. London locations. Soderbergh chose function as thematic commentary. Britain's intelligence establishment carries imperial legacy. MI6 evolved from intelligence services that managed a global empire. That history haunts the film's margins. These institutions have existed for centuries, outlasting individual operatives, accumulating power while externalizing costs onto personnel. The city itself, with its layers of history, its CCTV surveillance infrastructure, its financial sector, built on information asymmetry, becomes perfect setting for examining institutional betrayal. Zurich operates differently in the film's geography. Switzerland's neutrality makes it intelligence work's favorite meeting ground precisely because everyone operates there. The city's banking secrecy, its position between major European powers, its carefully maintained political neutrality, all create environment where clandestine meetings blend into legitimate business. When George goes to Zurich, it could be anything. That ambiguity is the point. Soderbergh shoots both cities without travelogue aesthetics. London isn't Big Ben and red phone booths. Zurich isn't alpine postcards. They're working cities where intelligence officers perform bureaucratic duties that happen to be classified. The locations serve operational function, transportation hubs, financial centers, diplomatic infrastructure, rather than scenic value. The film's treatment of technology reveals interesting choices. Modern espionage involves extensive electronic surveillance. Emails, phones, financial transactions all leave digital traces. Black Bag presumably shows this investigative technology without fetishizing it. No dramatic screen displays with scrolling code, no hacker characters explaining their wizardry, just professionals using standard intelligence tools to compile evidence against George. This restraint distinguishes Black Bag from spy films that treat technology as magic. The Mission Impossible franchise turns tech into plot devices that accomplish whatever the scene requires. The Bond films use surveillance technology to create paranoid atmosphere. You're always watched, always trackable. Black Bag likely presents technology as bureaucratic tool, unglamorous, functional, part of the institutional machinery that processes human beings into case files. Me. The narrative technique of strategic ellipsis creates interesting viewing experience. Soderbergh break probably cuts away from key conversations before they conclude, showing us beginnings or endings but not complete exchanges. We see Kathryn enter Arthur's office for a briefing cut to her leaving with new operational directive. What was said? We infer from subsequent behavior rather than watching explicit instruction. This editing choice mirrors intelligence work's compartmentalization. Nobody tells you everything. You receive minimum necessary information for your specific task. The film replicates that experience structurally, parceling out information on need-to-know basis that keeps viewers slightly off balance, constantly assembling incomplete data into provisional understanding. Jet-time compression serves similar function. The investigation probably spans weeks or months, but the 90-minute runtime necessitates radical compression. Soderbergh handles this through rhythmic editing that suggests duration without depicting it tediously. Montage sequences might show Kathryn reviewing files, days collapsing into minutes of screen time. But these aren't stylized montages with music video aesthetics. They are functional compressions that maintain documentary tone. The film subverts spy genre expectations systematically. No exotic locations beyond functional European cities. No action sequences where the protagonist fights through enemies. No gadgets or elaborate technical operations. No romantic subplot separate from the central marriage. No comic relief character. No third act twist that reframes everything. Black Bag refuses every conventional pleasure spy thrillers traditionally provide. This isn't mere negation. It's purposeful examination of what remains when you strip away fantasy. What's left is people, relationships, institutions, and the moral costs of operational security. That residue might not be commercially appealing, but it's thematically rich and formally rigorous in ways that justify the artistic choices even as they doom box office prospects. Soderbergh's camera becomes almost invisible through perfect functionality. You're not consciously aware of cinematography most of the time because it serves story transparently. Only in retrospect do you recognize the sophistication. How blocking communicated power dynamics, how lighting emphasized isolation, how framing choices created claustrophobia or distance as needed. The technique serves content so completely that it disappears into effect. This represents high-level craft that casual viewers might not register but that filmmakers recognize immediately. Shooting handheld this precisely requires enormous skill. Making naturalistic lighting look this good while maintaining narrative clarity demands technical mastery. Editing this economically while preserving emotional impact is genuinely difficult. Soderbergh makes it look effortless, which is the ultimate achievement. The critical commercial divide surrounding Black Bag tells its own story about contemporary cinema. Critics recognize what Soderbergh achieved: tight direction, stellar performances, moral complexity that respects viewer intelligence. Reviews praise Blanchett's controlled intensity and the film's refusal to provide easy answers. Professional film writers understood they were watching adult cinema operating at high craft level, but that critical appreciation didn't translate into ticket sales, and the reasons why reveal uncomfortable truths about theatrical exhibition in 2025. The box office numbers are brutal: 21.5 million domestic, 43.4 million worldwide against a 50.60 million production budget. Even accounting for marketing costs that probably added 20.3 million, focus features faced significant theatrical losses. Streaming and home video will eventually push the film toward profitability, but the theatrical window, once the primary revenue source, failed completely. What happened? Multiple factors converged. March 2025 was crowded with holdover blockbusters and incoming franchise entries. Black Bag positioned itself as counter-programming, the smart adult choice. but the audience most likely to appreciate Soderbergh's craft increasingly stays home. Why pay for parking, concessions, and tickets when you can watch complex dramas on your couch in a few months? The theatrical value proposition works for spectacle that demands big screens. For intimate character drama, even brilliantly executed, the economic incentive favors waiting. Demographics matter too. Younger audiences who drive opening weekends gravitate toward franchise content and social media friendly experiences. Black Bag offers neither. It's not designed for TikTok clips or viral marketing. It's a film that rewards sustained attention and tolerates ambiguity qualities that don't generate social media engagement. The over 40 audience that would appreciate this work has largely abandoned regular theatrical attendance except for event movies. The R rating created additional barriers. Not because the content is particularly graphic, but because R-rated adult dramas struggle to find audiences in a marketplace optimized for 4-quadrant PG-113 releases. Theaters allocate screens based on revenue potential, and a 93 minute R-rated spy drama can't compete with 3-hour blockbusters playing on multiple screens simultaneously. Black Bag's commercial failure isn't about quality, it's about structural changes in how audiences consume cinema. Mid-budget adult dramas 30-70 million range are becoming extinct theatrically. Studios have bifurcated into either massive tentpoles or micro-budget projects, abandoning the middle where films like Black Bag exist. This produces cultural loss, the elimination of a space where serious filmmakers could work at reasonable scale with creative freedom. Soderbergh occupies unique position in this landscape. He's proven he can deliver blockbusters. The Ocean's trilogy grossed over 1 billion combined. He's also demonstrated efficiency and reliability that gives him leverage with producers and studios. At 62, he's established enough to operate outside typical Hollywood constraints, bouncing between theatrical releases, streaming projects, and experimental work without career pressure to chase trends. His productivity is astonishing. Since 2010, he's directed 14 features plus television projects, working faster and more prolifically than peers of comparable stature. This volume comes from his stripped-down approach: small crews, digital cameras, self-operated equipment, and editing in post. He's industrialized auteur filmmaking, creating systems that allow for consistent output without compromising vision. Black Bag represents this working method at peak efficiency: 93 minutes, 50-60 million budget, lean production schedule, complete creative control, even with commercial underperformance. The model remains viable because Soderbergh keeps costs reasonable and maintains relationships with financiers who trust his process. He'll keep making films because he's proven sustainable profitability over career span even when individual projects don't hit. The film's contemporary relevance feels almost accidental. Soderbergh wasn't making a statement about current surveillance anxiety, but Black Bag arrives when institutional trust is collapsing globally. Intelligence services face public skepticism about their methods and motives. The Edward Snowden revelations permanently altered how citizens view government surveillance. The film's examination of how institutions betray individuals while demanding loyalty resonates with broader cultural exhaustion regarding systems that externalize costs onto people. The marriage investigation becomes metaphor for citizen-state relationships. We are told to trust institutions that simultaneously surveil us. We are expected to maintain faith in systems that prioritize their own preservation over individual welfare. Kathryn's impossible position, forced to investigate her husband for institutional security, mirrors how ordinary people navigate surveillance capitalism and government overreach. You are expected to participate in systems designed to extract value from you while offering minimal reciprocal obligation. This wasn't Soderbergh's explicit intention, but great films accrue meaning through cultural context. Black Bag's bleak assessment of institutional loyalty feels urgently relevant in ways that more topical films might not. By focusing on human cost rather than ideological commentary, the film transcends specific political moment to examine enduring tensions between individual and institution. Awards consideration was likely minimal despite the quality. Black Bag's March release timing disadvantaged it for year-end awards campaigning. The film's austere approach doesn't quote Academy voters who often favor more obviously important work with historical sweep or social justice themes. Blanchett and Fassbender delivered career-caliber performances, but neither role offers the showy moments that attract acting nominations. No big speeches, no physical transformations, just sustained interior work that's harder to clip for promotional reels. This represents another way mid-budget adult dramas get squeezed. Without awards heat to generate press and secondary box office bumps, these films struggle for oxygen in crowded marketplace. Black Bag deserved more attention than it received, but the mechanisms that generate that attention have largely stopped functioning for this type of cinema. Where does this rank in Blanchett's extraordinary career? She is given more celebrated performances. Kathryn Hepburn in The Aviator, Bob Dylan in I'm Not There, Carol Aird in Carol. But Catherine St. Jean might be her most technically difficult role because it demands almost complete interior work. Blanchett plays someone professionally trained to mask emotion, investigating her husband while maintaining operational cover. The performance exists in micro-expressions and strategic silences. It's brilliant work that won't appear on highlight reels because it's too subtle, too internal, too dependent on accumulated context. For Fassbender, this continues a pattern of choosing difficult, morally ambiguous roles that showcase his range while avoiding easy commercial choices. After Magneto in the X-Men films gave him blockbuster credibility, he could have pursued franchise work. Instead, he selected projects like Shame, 12 Years a Slave, and now Black Bag films that demand emotional availability and technical precision. George Woodhouse joins a filmography of complicated men whose interior lives remain partially opaque even after extended observation. Both actors elevate Black Bag beyond its already strong foundation. Lesser performers would have simplified the moral complexity, playing clearer choices that telegraph innocence or guilt, virtue or villainy. Blanchett and Fassbender maintain ambiguity while creating fully realized human beings. That's high-wire acting that looks effortless but requires enormous control. The future of intelligent spy thrillers like Black Bag likely lives in streaming rather than theatrical exhibition. Platforms like Netflix, Amazon, and Apple have budgets and audience bases that can sustain mid-budget adult dramas without requiring theatrical success. Soderbergh himself has worked extensively with streaming services, delivering films directly to platforms where they find audiences unconstrained by theatrical economics. This shift creates opportunities and losses. More filmmakers can access funding for projects that wouldn't get theatrical distribution, but the communal experience of watching challenging cinema in theaters with focused attention gets replaced by home viewing with phones buzzing and distractions multiplying. Black Bag benefits from theatrical presentation. The 93-minute runtime demands uninterrupted attention, and Soderbergh's visual craft shows better on large screens. Streaming delivers access but compromises optimal viewing conditions. The film's artistic achievement stands independent of commercial performance. Soderbergh crafted exactly the film he intended, formally rigorous, thematically complex, emotionally devastating. The 93-minute runtime contains no wasted moments. The performances are uniformly excellent. The technical craft operates at master level throughout. The screenplay navigates moral complexity without simplifying or moralizing. By any measure of artistic success, Black Bag delivers completely. What the box office failure indicates isn't quality deficiency but marketplace transformation. Audiences haven't rejected this film specifically. They've largely abandoned theatrical attendance for anything except event cinema. Black Bag is collateral damage in larger structural shift that's eliminating space for mid-budget adult dramas in theatrical release. This matters because cinema needs diversity of form and content. A marketplace dominated exclusively by franchise tentpoles and micro-budget horror creates cultural monoculture. Films like Black Bag intelligent, adult, formally ambitious become endangered species. When they disappear from theatrical exhibition, we lose not just individual films but entire categories of cinematic experience. Soderbergh will continue working regardless. He is too productive and too efficient to stop. But Black Bag's commercial underperformance might push future projects towards streaming platforms where success metrics differ from theatrical box office. That's pragmatic adaptation to changing industry, but it represents loss of theatrical space for serious adult cinema. The film's legacy will be determined over time rather than through opening weekend grosses. Black Bag will find its audience through streaming, home video, and critical re-evaluation. Films this formally accomplished and thematically rich tend to improve with age and repeated viewing. The initial commercial disappointment will fade while the artistic achievement endures. For viewers seeking intelligent cinema that respects their capacity for moral complexity and tolerates ambiguity, Black Bag is essential. It demonstrates that spy thrillers can be about something beyond plot mechanics, that genre filmmaking can carry thematic weight without sacrificing craft, that austerity and accessibility aren't mutually exclusive. Soderbergh proves you can make a film that's both formally rigorous and emotionally devastating without pandering or simplifying. By the performances from Blanchett, Fassbender, Brosnan, and the supporting ensemble create a world that feels authentic to actual intelligence work rather than movie fantasies. The technical mastery, Soderbergh's cinematography, his editing, Hohn's score, Messina's production design serve story and character without calling attention to itself. Coeb's screenplay navigates impossible moral dilemmas without pretending there are clean solutions. Bob Black Bag matters because films this uncompromising and this accomplished are rare. Soderbergh didn't make the commercially safe version with added action sequences and clearer moral messaging. He made the austere, difficult, honest version that examines institutional betrayal through the destruction of a marriage. That takes artistic courage that deserves recognition even when box office doesn't cooperate. The film stands as testament to what mid-budget adult cinema can achieve when talented filmmakers have creative freedom. It's a reminder that popular genres, spy thrillers in this case, can carry serious thematic weight when approached with intelligence and craft. It's proof that audiences exist for challenging work, even if theatrical distribution struggles to reach them efficiently. Ultimately, Black Bag succeeds completely on its own terms. Soderbergh set out to make an unglamorous, morally complex spy thriller about institutional betrayals, human costs. He delivered exactly that, executed with technical mastery and anchored by brilliant performances. The commercial failure is industry problem, not artistic failure. This is the film Soderbergh intended, and it's excellent.